Hello, everyone. My name is Ceta, and I'm a sophomore at Brooklyn College. I'm also a member of Young Invincibles Young Advocates Program, which is a leadership program in policy and advocacy. Thank you so much for joining us in our student town hall today. While we're living in this difficult time, we also know that the challenges COVID-19 brings to our campuses are not new. College students across city and state were experiencing homelessness, food insecurities, and mental health issues long before this crisis. As COVID-19 continues, we want to know how is New York's leadership helping the state colleges and college students survive this crisis? And what can students do to make sure our voices are heard as we plan for the future semester? Today, we hope to get some answers. This town hall is an opportunity to share some of our experiences as New York college students navigating through this crisis. We will hear from our elected officials on how they can make sure that all students have access to resources we need to persist through this challenging semester and make it to graduation. We know many students have joined us today, and we want to make sure that we hear from you too. Melanie will go over the details about how students can ask questions and follow us along on social media. Now I'm going to pass it over to James, who will introduce the elected officials.
Thank you, Neha. My name is James Hill III, and I'm a first-year student at Borough of Manhattan Community College. I'm also a member of the Young Advocates Program. I'm going to introduce you to the elected officials who have joined today's call. First, we have Assemblymember Harvey Epstein. Assemblymember Epstein represents the east side of Manhattan. He has been a community leader for more than 20 years. Assemblymember Epstein has engaged in numerous community struggles to protect low-wage workers, local daycare centers, and diversity admissions in public schools. Next, we have Assemblymember Deborah Glick. Assemblymember Glick is a lifelong resident of New York City. Assemblymember Glick is now serving her 15th term in the Assembly. Since 2007, she has been the chair of the New York State's Assembly of Higher Education, of the Higher Education Committee, my bad. Next, we have Senator Robert Jackson. Senator Jackson grew up in Upper Manhattan and currently represents that area in the Senate today. He is a lifelong community leader who is dedicated to educational equity. Senator Jackson has served 12 years as a New York City Council member. Last but not least, we are joined by Senator Toby Ann Stavisky. Senator Stavisky is a native New Yorker who was born and raised on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. She is the first woman from Queens County elected to the state Senate. A former teacher, Senator Stavisky currently serves as the chair of the Senate's Committee of Higher Education. Today, thank you all. Thanks to all the elected who joined us today. And now I'm going to pass it off to Melanie, who will share with you community guidelines for today's town hall.
Awesome. Thank you, James. And thank you everybody for coming today. It's really nice to see you. You know, when we planned this town hall, we were certainly hoping to be able to do this in person. So we appreciate everybody being flexible with the technical difficulties and are really excited to have you all here with us today. So before we get started, I just wanted to go over a couple of ground rules for today's meeting and just to kind of give you an idea of how this will go. So as you might notice, you are on mute right now, and we do ask that you stay on mute for the duration of this call. And if you do have any issues accessing the call or are having technical issues, you can use the chat function at the right side of the screen. All of your messages will come to me, Melanie. So please let me know if you have any issues hearing things. You can send those messages along to me. And so if you have any questions for our elected officials today or our students, you can send those along to me, Melanie, via the Zoom chat. I will also put in our chat a Google Doc where we're going to be keeping questions. And so we encourage you throughout the call to drop your questions in there, and we'll put that, I'll put that in there in a moment. And then for elected officials who are present today, We do ask that you keep your responses to around 2 minutes each, and we will have folks from Young Invincibles playing timekeeper, so please keep an eye on your private messages and we'll let you know. And then, normally when we do student town halls, folks can clap or snap or sort of cheer along when, something resonates with them. And we know that in our Zoom call, it's a little difficult to do that. So, if you are a student and something is really resonating with you today, or, just a student supporter, we do encourage you to join the conversation online. And so you can check us out on Twitter at Young Invincible, no S at the end, and then with our hashtags that I will also include in the chat. So really excited to see the conversation happen there, and we know this is just the beginning. And then one last thing, we do know that folks are really looking for a lot of resources and support right now, dealing with a lot of different issues that we'll be talking about in today's conversation. And so we will be sending around a resource document in the chat. And if there's anything that you see in that chat that doesn't seem right, just let us know that. So that, I'm going to hand it off to Romy, who will give us an introduction. Romy, if you're speaking, you might be on mute.
Hello, can you hear me now?
We can hear you, Romy.
Okay, thank you, Melanie. Once again, welcome to all the students, guests, and to our distinguished government officials joining us today, Assembly members Harvey Epstein and Deborah Glick, as well as Senators Robert Jackson and Toby Ann Stavisky. We are glad to have you at our town hall today with Young Invincibles and are grateful for your support for New York's college students through crisis and beyond. I am Romy Robielos II, a member of the Young Advocates Program and a junior at New York City College of Technology. In just a matter of weeks, 7 weeks to be exact today, my school transitioned to distance learning. Partially open campuses that allowed for lab or computer use or library access were also soon closed. Campus jobs moved to online only, and essential programs such as food pantries closed or had extremely limited hours. This is just a small snapshot into how the lives of New York City college students have changed dramatically over the last month. Personally, as someone who has had a history of anxiety and depression, this seemingly new territory has slowly been creating sort of a mental torture for a highly achieving student like me, resulting to constant demotivation, unproductivity, and fear of the unknown. I am faced with the vulnerable day-to-day struggle of thinking how my dad, who is a current frontline worker in the hospital, and my mom, who is a diagnosed bipolar, can navigate with this highly risky pandemic, knowing close family of friends who have succumbed to the virus and some even lost their loved ones. Seeking for employment to continuously provide for my basic needs, such as food and preventive medicine, has also been a major dilemma for similar students like me nowadays. With major companies and small businesses shutting down everywhere, and overall unemployment rate, not just in the city, but all over America, is expected to reach a century high next to the Great Depression in 1930s by summer 2020. This got me thinking, what is life gonna look like in the next few weeks, months, or years? I personally believe there's really more than just flattening the curve in this COVID-19 pandemic, but intrinsically changing convoluted systems we all are exposingly a part of. As Naya mentioned, even before COVID-19, New York's college students struggled to make sure their basic needs were met. For instance, last year, a survey from the Hope Center found that 14% of CUNY undergraduates experience homelessness in a given year. The same survey found that about half of CUNY students had trouble getting enough to eat. We also know students struggle with their mental health. Before the crisis, a third of CUNY students said the mental health issue interfered with their academics. And for many low-income first-generation students of color in New York's colleges, concerns about finding meaningful paid work after graduation were always there. But while we're still learning about how the COVID-19 crisis is impacting students, The fact is, we know this crisis is largely weakening the well-being of millions of our beloved New Yorkers. More and more New Yorkers are wondering how they'll pay this month's rent. Many of us are finding it hard to find enough food to eat. And as millions lose jobs, we know that we're only beginning to see the serious impact of this crisis on New York's college students, especially low-income students, immigrant, and even undocumented students and students of color. And for those of us graduating this semester, there are serious questions about what kind of job market we're entering into. During today's Sound Hall, New York City college students will break down each of these issues and provide testimonies on how these issues playing out on their campuses. Then we'll provide questions to the elected officials on the call to see how the state can better support students and our communities in this unprecedented time. Now, I'm going to hand it over to Marcia to dig into the food and housing issues facing New York's college students during COVID-19. Thank you.
Hello. Hi. Thanks, Romy. So I'm Marcia Collier, and I'm a student at City College. As Romy mentioned, students on my campus already had trouble affording food and housing before the pandemic. Now our issues with food and housing are even more severe during this public health crisis. Earlier this month, a survey from the CUNY School of Public Health found that 85% of New Yorkers reported a reduction in food access during the crisis. We know that these issues are impacting college students. They're impacting students on my campus also. And even though more college campuses have food resources like food pantries, we've also seen that these resources reduce their hours during the crisis as well. And while students can access different community and volunteer food deliveries and drop-offs across the city, we don't know what's gonna happen once the city college opens again, and once the city opens again, sorry, not city college, and millions of New Yorkers still have trouble eating. I speak on behalf of one girl who I shared classes with who frequently skipped meals to save money and would only eat once a day. Food on and around campus is very expensive, averaging about $10 a meal, and she didn't have enough pantry vouchers to last her even halfway through the semester. We also know housing is a major issue right now. People know housing in New York is expensive, but not everybody thinks about what that means for city college students who are already juggling costs like tuition, rent, and other terms and fees. In city dorms, in CUNY, dorms are really hard to come by and very expensive. We saw issues around the dorms during the crisis when students quickly had to leave their dorms behind or get shifted to new dorms. And as Romy mentioned, we know that thousands of CUNY students already struggled with homelessness, and we are now trying to navigate staying healthy in an unstable housing. That includes college students living in cities' shelter systems, who might not even be able to use their computers in shelters. I had a male friend who was an engineering student that could not afford campus housing. So he was kicked out within 3 weeks of failing to make the last month's payment and faced on and off again homelessness for another year. This was due to a lack of housing assistance on CUNY's part. There's a lot that needs to be done to address students' food and housing needs. And now I'm gonna hand it to my colleague, Paola Cruz, who will speak about the need for simple, accessible emergency aid for students.
Thanks, Marcia. My name is Paola Cruz, and I'm a student at Columbia University. As Marcia mentioned, there are a lot of financial needs being faced by New York's college students, including students at the city's private institutions like mine. For some colleges, the emergency funds have already existed, but now the demand is very high as students and families lose work while potentially taking on new expenses like internet access or computers to make sure they can keep up with classes. Plus, we know that students have had trouble getting that emergency aid in the first place. We know one student in our program who was denied for an emergency aid application because she who earlier on in the crisis faced challenges applying for aid when he was asked to go to campus to provide necessary documentation. We also know that the federal government is sending money to New York's colleges for emergency aid as a part of the CARES Act. Now, the emergency grants funded by the CARES Act must address the basic needs students might be facing, from housing to childcare to accessing food. For instance, Columbia never provides any emergency funds to students overall, although they did provide for students who were moving out of campus, yet never for students who might need assistance in buying food or who are in general needed the most help during this time. I'm assuming the CARES Act will put pressure on our institution to finally provide this form of assistance to students and hopefully adapt it as a whole, even when this crisis is over. But what we don't know yet is how that aid will get to students. Will the aid application be simple for students to apply for, or will we need to track down a bunch of documents to use? Can students apply multiple times? And how can we be sure the aid is going to students who need it the most? And now we'll pass it over to Tanisha to start us on our first question for Elect Eds on food access.
Thanks, Paula. My name is Tanisha and I'm a student at Hunter College. Our first question on food access, the first question is on food access for college students. We know that food is a necessity for survival and many New Yorkers are having trouble getting enough food. Hunter does have a food pantry and the city has created a grab-and-go food for all program where all New Yorkers could go to any public school and receive breakfast and lunch from 7 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. Though this is a great program that has benefited a lot of New Yorkers, it would help more New Yorkers if the hours were longer. As campuses close, access to food for students is harder than ever. Many campus food pantries are closed or offer extremely limited hours. Meanwhile, the state's investment in campus food pantries has not increased since 2018, and very few college students enroll in food stamps. How can students push our state to invest in student access to food during this crisis?
All right, so if any of our elected officials would like to answer that first question, please let us know.
I can say one thing if that's okay. I mean, we have a food crisis in our city, and we are using whatever the network that's in place in public schools as you just said, but we're not using the campuses well at all. I think we're not making good choices here. And so just because you go to school at Hunter, but maybe you live near Medgar Evers, why are we not opening up the system to allow food access to people anywhere in the system? Why are we not making choices that say, okay, we want you to have access to food, not just as grab-and-go meals, because those grab-and-go meals aren't that great. How are we creating the structure in place? So we're using the food bank and the city's doing a decent job getting that food out, but we're not using other structures. So I think one is we got to make sure the community system says that food programs and food money, you should be able to go from campus to campus to campus. You shouldn't just be limited to the campus you go to, because that may not be what the campus you live near. Second of all, I think we should be thinking about how food insecurity plays out in so many ways. It's not just about you, it's about your entire family. So how do we get additional resources to those students? Students lost their job, maybe their families lost their job. We know there's 23, 25 million people now without jobs. How do we ensure that we allow emergency grants to go out? Even if you got emergency grants in the last years, as Paulo said, how do we ensure those emergency grants go out so you can pay for basic necessities? And if you're paying for food, what does that mean to your housing costs? Are you're going to be paying for food now? That means you're going to result in you can be evicted in 3 months. We need to look at this comprehensively, and look at it comprehensively for students across the system. And the last thing I'll say is, if we're talking about food insecurity for people, I don't know how we focus on a tuition increase next month, which will make people much more precarious. So we have to look at it and say, we know people are struggling. How do we make it less difficult for them to struggle? And it's got to be the whole package for food support, as well as ensuring that we can provide other benefits for students across the system.
If I could just say that obviously our hope for a year prior to the crisis was to make dramatic changes in our ability to support students across SUNY, CUNY, and even in some of the private colleges. I think that the colleges are not at all able to open all of their services, but I agree with Assemblymember Epstein that students who have a school ID should be able to go to any campus. And the city has not put any of the grab and go on campuses, which would have been helpful in those neighborhoods where the campuses are. And I don't quite understand why they didn't do that.
Thank you so much for your answers. The next question is on the shift to distant learning and what it means for us academically. Like a lot of other students, I have had trouble with distance learning. Not every student has access to reliable internet or technology, and a lot of us are in apartments that can be distracting and not the best for learning. Personally, I found class instruction has not been as effective, and often I find myself doing more assignments than when in-person classes were held. It's no surprise that our grades may be suffering as a result. I know that CUNY and other private colleges and institutions are being understanding with their optional credit policies and pass and fail policies. However, I wanted to know if not meeting academic standards would disqualify me for financial aid like TAP. What is the state doing to make sure that students don't lose their TAP awards during this challenging time?
Let me just say that I think two things are going to happen. One, CUNY has recognized the variability of the online learning experience for students, and they're not certain what the fall is going to look like. So they are going to work this summer with professors who need training in online teaching in order to have them better understand how to operate. And it's not just CUNY. I got something from a student up in Ithaca saying, I feel like I'm doing a lot of work and sending it out there, but I have no real sense of how I'm doing. And I think that it was, for a lot of people, a crash course, including myself. It took me a while to get on this Zoom meeting. It's been a bit of a crash course, and there are some people, perhaps some of the younger professors, may have had a little experience with online teaching, communicating, but not in the way that it would be useful and helpful. As far as the loss of TAP, I do not believe we will be in touch with the State Education Department for their reviews and with the agency HESC to ensure that no one loses any of their TAP in the course of this crisis. That's totally unacceptable, and we will make certain that that does not happen.
Thank you for your answer, Assemblymember Glick, and thank you again for your patience with technology. Agreed, we're all learning in this time. I wanted to double check if there are any other electeds who want to.
Yes, I'm on here. Hello?
We can hear you.
That's like Senator Stavisky.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, because I had a problem getting on. Let me respond to a couple of those issues real quick. The chancellor has his fund for emergencies, and I think it was in the ballpark of $1 million. Secondly, with regard to TAP, I was curious, so I looked at their website last night, and there are really only 3 ways you can lose your TAP eligibility. One is to move out of the state. Another is to not maintain your 12 credit full-time status, but we do have the part-time appropriation. And lastly, if you don't maintain the 2.0 GPA. And I didn't see any other indications, and that their website is more geared to applying for TAP. But those were the three conditions that I saw last. I was curious about that myself. And I hope there's no excuse for the students losing their eligibility. And lastly, in the April budget that we passed, we did add an additional $25 million for the food banks. And obviously they should be on the campuses of some of the colleges. But on the other hand, the food banks do have additional funding in addition to what was the other $25 million that was appropriated. And I'm happy. I struggled to get on here because the link wasn't working. So I'm happy to be here, and I thank you all.
And can I just add one thing? Because I do think the senator and both chairs raised a good point. But, you know, if you, for some reason, let's say your family economic situation's changed and you have to go below 12 credits, or you use 12, and you can't get done your 4 year, your 8 credits of the TAP, we need to ensure that students have additional time, maybe an additional semester of TAP, and not lose that opportunity to have, those credits apply to a new semester and have additional TAP points. So I think we will have to figure that out with HASCA as Chair Glick just mentioned, but I think that's an important issue for students, because we've heard from time and time again from students that say, well, I had to drop these classes, and great on the CUNY system, you can just drop it, credit, no credit, be able to make choices, but that doesn't mean you still don't want to graduate, and that doesn't mean you'll be able to afford it without the TAP support.
Well, one thing I would say is that the pass-fail option was something that existed throughout our fights around the Vietnam War, and it did in no way impact people's financial aid. So you got your credit. I understand that there may have been pressures for some people to drop courses, but if at anything, if people are having a technology issue, access to Wi-Fi, that is something that should come directly to the campuses. And they have, I forget the number, but they put out thousands of laptops, and SUNY did the same thing. They raised money for, I think, 7,000 laptops on loan, and then did another 7,000. So the systems have been responsible in trying to respond, but there is the issue of access to Wi-Fi, which we know is not even. And across the state, there are places where broadband doesn't exist. So that has been a challenge. But I don't believe that campuses are going to penalize students. If people have problems, they should get in touch with me.
Okay, great. Thank you for all your answers. Our next question is on housing. So we saw how quickly this semester disrupted students' housing situations. What can New York State do to address housing insecurity among college students? And how can we support college students experiencing homelessness?
Well, one thing that was true is that many of the campuses, and this isn't CUNY so much as SUNY, many of the campuses for some period of time have recognized that even at holiday breaks, there are students who have no home to go to. And so they generally keep some of the campus, some of the dorms open, available to students. And I do know that there have been students who have been stranded out of town, and the campuses have, to the best of my knowledge, allowed students to stay. That I know of some students who, because of their health conditions, were afraid to return to New York, and they were allowed to stay on campus. They had respiratory illnesses or whatever, and they were afraid to go home. And in some instances, there were students who didn't have the resources to go home, and they assisted out of their emergency funds to help with transportation dollars. Students who are homeless who are CUNY students, that is a much more complicated issue, because the campuses have not been set up, as opposed to SUNY that is somewhat used to having to deal with that concern. Harvey, do you have any thoughts?
Well, I would say, as we all know, there's probably 100,000 empty hotel rooms in New York City right now, and the city could be a leader on this issue if they said, you know, if we can't social distance, if we can't take care of our people, we're going to create a worse healthcare crisis. And housing insecurity is not something that's unfamiliar to our city. With 60,000 homeless people in New York City and 90,000 homeless people across the state, we have an opportunity now to help people. And I'm not saying it won't be a budget buster, but everything's a budget buster right now. I mean, every time we turn around, we're spending, you know, the mayor's announced he's going to give out 100,000 masks this weekend, which is great. Everyone should get a free mask, but that doesn't mean it doesn't cost money. We have an opportunity to help people, and we should use whatever tools available in our tool belt to do it. And that includes using the housing resources that are going to be empty. And unfortunately, we're going to see a rise in homelessness unless we act, because you know 30 million people across the country are unemployed, 3 million in New York right now. How are people going to pay the rent? And we need to act affirmatively. And I think there's a lot of availability to do it if we want to be smart and creative. The last thing I'll just say is budgets are priorities, and we all know that. And you know, we have a great leader in the Assembly and the Senate. But at the end of the day, we did not tax people more who could afford to pay more. Billionaires and millionaires in New York State do not pay enough of the resources to cover the cost to run New York. We had an opportunity before, we didn't do it. We still have an opportunity because the governor is proposing additional cuts very soon. So we should prioritize revenue to avoid the steep cuts that are coming down the pike.
Can I add to, hello?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, let me just add to that. I held hearings last fall throughout the state, and one of the really most poignant moments was one of the student leaders, and I think it was the hearing out in Nassau County, spoke about being homeless, of living in his car, and that really brought to light some of the problems. This is a serious problem at CUNY. Not so much at the State University, because many of them are in dorms. And to their credit, both chancellors brought students home early from overseas programs, and I think that was important. Of course, we should be putting students in unused hotels. Queens College is in my district, and we're one of the few CUNY branches that has a dormitory. Not a large one, but it's a dorm. And the students were placed in other housing facilities because they turned it into a hospital. They were planning to turn it into a hospital, so they closed the dorms at Queens College fairly early. But this is it. The issue of homelessness and food insecurity, this is something that I think we've really got to take a look at. And we also have to deal with students who have mental health issues. And to me, one of the most egregious decisions is going to be, or hopefully it'll work out, when the trustees of CUNY meet in June. They're talking about raising tuition by $200, but to me, even worse is the $120 mental health fee that we're asking students to pay for. I mean, to me, that's just plain wrong. It's like asking a COVID-19 patient to pay for their antiviral medication. This is wrong. This is a cost that I think is going to increase, and the students should certainly be aware that there are facilities available, whether it be food or housing or health care, and we have to provide for that.
I would also I think that's a great point. I would say that currently, and it won't last forever, but currently there is a state hotline that is free for counseling, and it is mental health counselors and professionals who are donating their time. So if you call the state hotline, you can make an appointment for free counseling. And I think that a lot of people, the isolation for some people, you know, in some instances, we've heard of people, it's like 6 people living in an apartment and usually half of them are at home and they manage. Now they're all together and it's a little tense. In other circumstances, people are alone and that is so isolating. And we are, there are reports that we are having very vivid dreams because of the anxiety, and the lack of mental stimulation is leading to your subconscious digging deeper. And so peculiar things from people's childhood are rising up. So I do think that it is a time to avail oneself. The campuses have never had sufficient mental health counseling. That even when I went to school, which is a century ago, it was not sufficient, and that was allegedly when we had good economic times. So, but I would suggest that if you are struggling, it is important. There is help. It is free. Call the mental health hotline now.
Thank you.
That is may I just add, I know that program very well. But it has it's a pilot project. I think it had an appropriation of about 600,000.
No.
Different program.
This is different. This is the state has gotten 10,000 professionals to volunteer their time. So it's during this emergency, totally separate.
Sorry.
No worries. Thank you so much. I just wanted to, I'm Marissa, the Northeast Director here at Young Invincibles. I know that we have Senator Jackson on the line. Senator Jackson, would you like to weigh in on this conversation?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
So earlier, the question was asked, and obviously, when you talk about this, what can solve all of this? The willingness to get things done in order to help people. And obviously, funding is extremely important in this process. And in fact, the issue of revenue enhancement came up last night in our town hall meeting that we had with about 8 different senators. And the bottom line of it all is that we have to be able to be willing to work with the Assembly in order to work together in order to get things done, even if the governor disagrees with allocating appropriate funding. That's what we have to do. And obviously, it's going to take the will of not only us, but the people involved, students and others, in order to make sure that we get the appropriate funding so that everyone can survive this pandemic. With that, I'm going to I'll come out and listen again because I'm heading uptown and I just don't want to driving and talking at the time.
No worries. Thank you so much. Great. So we'll move on to our next question.
Actually, that's the last question for this topic. Thank you for your responses. We look forward to working with you to make sure that New York City college students have the supports they need. I understand Glick and Stavisky already started the topic of mental health. So now I'm going to hand it over to Lyric, who will be talking about the impact COVID-19 has had on students' mental health. Thank you again.
Thank you, Tanisha. My name is, excuse me, wow. My name is Lyric Young, and I'm currently a senior at the City College of New York. At this very moment, we're in a reality where students need support now more than ever. We're anxious, we're scared, and we really have no idea what to expect for the future. And so trying to manage my own anxiety and depression was already increasingly difficult. And it's really only become harder than ever considering the circumstances we're facing. And our students need to know that their voices are not only being heard, but they're being listened to during these times of uncertainty. I'm going to hand it over to Yasmin, who is going to share data on what we know about students' experience with mental health diagnoses.
Eric, my name is Yasmin Suwaid. I'm a 4th-year student at Baruch College. As someone who personally suffers from depression and anxiety, I'm aware of the toll that mental health issues take on young adults, and would like to share some staggering statistics to highlight the pressing need of mental health support. So prior to the outbreak of the corona pandemic, according to a journal published in PubMed in 2019, 1/3 of college students were diagnosed with a mental health condition. If we apply this statistic to the Baruch population, for example, of 18,000 students, that's 6,000 students suffering from a mental health issue at only one of the 18 CUNY campuses. So let us consider how many more students are impacted now by a mental health condition during the global pandemic, having to cope with loss, depression, anxiety, and hopelessness. With the limited number of counselors available on college campuses, how can we expect students to receive proper and effective help? According to a survey conducted this month by the CUNY School of Public Health, 54% of the younger age group were likely to manifest anxiety, 40% of the young adults live with depression, and 68% have expressed feelings of hopelessness. On top of having to focus on their own health and the health of their loved ones, some students are facing worse battles than were expected. I'm now going to pass it over to my colleague, Lisa, who can delve a little deeper and share a bit about her experience doing what we're all trying to do right now, take care of our mental health during the pandemic.
Thank you, Yasmin. Hi, I'm Lisa, and I'm a senior at John Jay College. So taking care of my mental health and well-being is really crucial for me as a student, especially during a pandemic. I personally suffer from anxiety, severe chronic depression, and even before the pandemic occurred. As a result of this pandemic, maintaining my mental health has only proved more difficult, as I do feel some sense of hopelessness considering I will be graduating in May, and much of the uncertainty surrounds, my future. So for example, like given the job market, I'm not really sure if I'll be able to find employment, and on top of that, be able to provide for my family. And aside from worrying about how financially stable and secure I'll be in the next month or so, I'm also worried about my safety. So some news media outlets have reported an increase in hate crimes towards the Asian community. I remember one instance I saw on the news, how 3 teenagers here in the city had actually attacked an elderly Asian woman with their umbrella, leaving a deep gash on her head. And hearing stories like this, even as an Asian Latinx woman, has made me afraid to even go outside my house at times when I need to get essential things such as, food or medication. And I often find myself making up scenarios of like what I would do to protect myself and ways to de-escalate a situation if it gets to a violent turning point. And, no one should have to live in that kind of cyclical state of fear, of anxiety, and fear of being targeted for false notions against one's own racial or ethnic identity. But however, with that being said, being able to have access to therapy on campus before and after the pandemic has really helped me work through my mental health, which is why I feel it's so important for students to gain access to these resources, as we all are experiencing collective traumas caused by this pandemic. And with that, I will ask a question for the elected officials present here. So before this crisis, students face challenges accessing mental health care on campus. And we know we need more counselors to meet students' needs, especially after COVID-19. But we're hearing about potential budget cuts, which could make it harder to hire more counselors. And students are being asked to cover the cost through increases in our health and wellness fee, but we don't know what mental health support will look like on campus. And with that being said, my question is, what can the state do to make sure students have mental health supports now and once we're back on campus?
Well, first, I do think that we're in a better situation as we're all locked away, because there is, in fact, a recognition by the state that professionals were not working and that they could volunteer their time. So I think we actually sort of counterintuitively have, in fact, more ability to call hotlines. Both the suicide hotline has been expanded, as well as this mental health, volunteer mental health counseling. I have to say, I'm always the skunk at the garden party, because I don't believe in, bullshitting people. If I can say that. I have to watch myself. We go on a family Zoom meeting and I say the wrong thing, but you're all adults. So I don't know if we do not get a bailout from the federal government, it will be devastating. And talking about adding counselors will be not a possibility. Now, I'm an optimist, so I believe 2 things. One, right now, our current deficit is about you know, $8 or $10 billion. I don't know exactly what we'll get in July to deal with the budget deficit that's sort of behind us. Usually we're looking at that as backfill for the last quarter at the beginning of the new year. We have to get federal bailout dollars. And if they arrive, it will still be a problem. The flip side is that this crisis has made people realize the inequities in our society, and the fact that people like myself are not struggling in the same way that people in minority communities or young people are suffering. So, two things. I don't expect more counselors on campus necessarily, but I do expect that we will push back hard on any increase in fees. The dollars that are coming to the colleges and getting sent to students, CUNY's getting about $118 million for the institutions and $118 million for students. Now, you have a lot of students, so it's not going to go that far. But hopefully, students will start to see that and it's based on how much Pell students are getting. So it's sort of a sliding scale. If you're getting a lot of Pell, it'll be a different base at each college, but you will get that base, which may be roughly 350 to 400, and full Pell students will get an additional 125. But it's for the, to deal with costs related to going to school. So whether it's healthcare or childcare or fees, which of course winds up back at the institution. So I'm hopeful that we won't see the dramatic cuts. I'm not sure what we'll be able to add in this year. After that, I want to tax people. I want my pied-à-terre tax to raise revenue. And then we'll be able to maybe build back.
Thank you.
Yeah, can I add to that?
Yes.
Let me just add, I would not look to the state of New York for any additional revenue. But obviously, we've been working with the federal government, particularly the senators and members of Congress, to encourage them to be as generous as possible for all education. In the Senate, we've been working with the Education Committee because education is really pre-K through postgraduate. And there was a substantial sum of money for higher education in the CARES, the first CARES Act that applied to education, but also the issue of mental health coverage. I think I mentioned that before, but that cannot be underestimated because it's not just the college students, it's the entire society that is suffering. And we're not getting money from the state. There's no doubt in my mind there are going to be cuts come the beginning of May. And the federal government has to provide the funding that we need. The good news is that half of the money, as Deborah said, goes to the students. And it goes to the students directly. The colleges, the public colleges receive the other half. The private colleges receive a much smaller amount, and their students are going to, as a result, receive a smaller amount also. There was somebody on from Columbia, and the amounts given to Columbia are far less than the amounts given to the public, as well it should be.
Thank you.
Can I say one quick thing?
Oh, I want to add one other. Let me just, and the last point I wanted to make was really important. I understand that hate crime bias because I represent a district that's about 2/3 or 70% Asian American. And what's happening in the Asian American community is so sad because they're not responsible for this. People's perception is being ignited from Washington. They're becoming xenophobic. They're attacking the Asian community. And we had an attack in my district in Forest Hills on Sunday. Woman was simply returning from the grocery store, and there was an altercation. She was attacked. This has got to stop. And the police are investigating as a hate crime. Thank you.
Thank you. Assemblymember Epstein and then Senator Jackson.
Yeah, I just, first of all, I just want to lift up what Lyric, Yasmin, and Lisa are saying. Thank you for sharing really tough stories. And it's in our society, talking about mental health issues are not easy issues. They happen to everyone in everyone's family, in my family, people I love. So this is important to share, and it shouldn't be secret. It shouldn't be something people talk about being shameful of. It's far from it. And I think it's really important that you continue to share those stories, because that's the only way we could prioritize the need for mental health support. And I agree with the senator and the assemblywoman that the budget's awful. And to staving off cuts is only going to happen with federal support. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't be raising our voices loudly and saying, this is a crisis we have, and we are living through a pandemic, and the people are going to struggle and face serious mental health issues. And the only way to get out of it is to help people. And we need to support people, and that includes providing much more mental health counseling. I think that we've gotten a lot from the volunteers, and we've gotten a lot, and I think no one wants to provide less, but budgets still are priorities. And if we prioritize this, we need to do it with resources, and that's got to be the long-term game for all of us.
Thank you. Senator Jackson, would you like to add?
The car, okay?
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. So he looks like he's multitasking there. We'll move on to the next question.
Wearing a
Thank you, everyone,
seatbelt?
for your responses. And I'll just hand it over to Yasmin for the next question.
So as we've mentioned already, we know that this crisis is not impacting all New Yorkers equally. For instance, a recent study from CUNY School of Public Health found that Asian Americans were more likely to feel hopeless during this crisis and compared to New Yorkers of all other races. How can the state address the racial and ethnic disparities students are facing during this crisis?
Well, I think we should be, look, we are behind the curve on doing anything that is in any way, you know, we have a segregated city. We see the disparities, and if anything has set a spotlight on those disparities, it has been both the lack of access to health care and the fact that many of our essential workers are people who come from minority communities and were more at risk and put more at risk by having to respond to this crisis by going to work, running the subway system. I think it's at least 80 people who work for the transit authority died. That is unbelievable. So I don't think you can separate the racial disparities that exist in the society from that which exists on in the way in which our campuses are unevenly resourced. So one thing that is a positive is that the larger number of Pell eligible students are actually going to see more resources going to those schools, but it's a drop in the bucket. So one thing that I think the city has tried to do and gotten, you know, a lot of flack for it is to try to again move to a less segregated school system. And we know that CUNY has a, you know, is largely, the city is largely a minority majority city. CUNY is largely a majority minority student body. And the one thing that the Assembly majority has been committed to is trying to force more money into our public higher education system, because that is where we feel we can make a difference. We've done a number of things that have to do with programs to support students who are, there's a graduate diversity program. There are our various opportunity programs, which clearly take in students who are economically and educationally somewhat disadvantaged, and they graduate at the same or higher rate than students who got in at the same, without any separate consideration. So we know what works. We know the ASAP program works. You give students free Metro cards. You give students some additional counseling and training and tutoring, and they succeed. And that is where, well, I think we all had hoped until this crisis that this would be the year that we'd be able to move forward on those things. But it was the Assembly that pushed forward a foster youth at college initiative. You know, all of these things have been increased each year, despite original cuts by the executive. They have been backfilled and increased for the last several years. We have to do more of that, and the kinds of things that are successful in those circumstances are what will make more and more students successful. So we know we need more supports around counseling and tutoring. And students, I mean, I never, you know, it took me forever to get out of college, incidentally. And it was because I really didn't know what I wanted to do or what courses to take. So we never provide sufficient support for students unless you absolutely know what you want to do. You're flying blind. And that's why it took me forever to get out. I tried this, I tried that, you know, no direction and no support in that direction. And we need to provide more of that so that students can be successful and understand that CUNY is the social mobility mechanism and has been recognized across the country as one of the leading institutions for social mobility.
Thank you. Thank you. Would any of our other electeds like to add anything?
No, I just want to add that CUNY was founded as City College in 1847, but their mission was interesting. I wasn't there, but it was to educate, at that time, the sons of immigrants. And that's what CUNY is doing today. They're continuing that mission, and we can't lose sight of that. We have students coming from all over the world, many of them to Queens County, and CUNY is the opportunity, is their passport to the middle class and to success and to enjoyment, and hopefully we're not going to lose sight of that. However, relating that to the virus epidemic, it's interesting because the highest cases, or the largest percentage of cases, are in the minority community because they lack the health care. They lack the opportunity that people who have been here for a while have. And Elmhurst Hospital has been the epicenter, and it happens to be in my district. And why does the immigrant community go to Elmhurst Hospital? Because they trust them. They know that they're going to get a caring staff, a community that welcomes them. And I think we've got to take advantage of what works, as Deborah said. What works and has worked, we've got to promote in the future. We're not always going to have a budget crisis. Things will get better and may take a little longer, but then we've got to focus on these opportunity programs which work and which the Senate Democratic Conference has always supported.
Thank you, Senator Stavisky. Senator Jackson.
Good. Okay.
Thank you. So I'm listening to all of the questions and concerns that are raised by the students, and obviously going back to the student from Columbia University spoke. Now, as far as endowment, Columbia University has a huge, humongous, billions of dollars in endowments. And so they should be able to set aside X amount of dollars for Columbia University students to meet their needs as far as cash for food, as far as housing. But Columbia, I don't know if they're doing that, but I say to the student that spoke from Columbia, they have a huge endowment to do that comparatively, where the City College just do not. So that's one thing. And then number two, you mentioned about the grab and go, and I looked online to see where in the district, and so for example, in certain locations they have halal food, grab and go, and kosher food grab and go, and that's really good. So from a networking point of view, I'm sure the students, college students, are more computer savvy than us older individuals, clearly. So you just have to use all of the networks possible in order to try to maintain an appropriate level of living as far as food and housing and healthcare is concerned. But I wanted to mention that my office established what we call mutual aid NYC. That's an umbrella organization that has that, with neighbors helping neighbors and other type of help providing each other. And so for the 31st Senatorial District, which runs from Marble Hill down to 26th Street, basically hovering the west side, is mutualaid.senatorjackson.com. And we have a lot of information as far as resources, but also if someone needed help as far as their unemployment, stuff like that, every elected official has specific access to the governor's office if there's specific issues or concerns as far as unemployment insurance and other things like that. So again, those are the type of networking and helping one another that we must do. But one thing I didn't hear what was mentioned, and I think that all of the students and everyone listening, is that there are 3 benchmarks that we're going to have to deal with in this budgetary process, and that is ending April 30th, June 30th, and December 31st, where the budget director of the state of New York will determine if the state budget is not in line, and there may be some devastating cuts. And as you know, assuming that, let's assume there is a 1% or 2% cut across all agencies, and obviously the governor has said in his daily briefings that he sees cuts in education, healthcare, and municipalities. And that's big, big, big. And so we have to put pressure on our federal government to give us the bailout that we need, and especially in New York City, which is the epicenter of the pandemic. So with that, people should reach out to their elected public officials if they need help in any particular area, so that we can try our best to help them coordinate and or get any type of services that they need.
Great.
I'll stop, and thank you, and thank my colleagues for being on there.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate your time. Assemblymember Epstein, it looked like you also wanted to chime in before we move on to the next section.
Yeah, I really just want to go back to the question around the issues of race and class, because I think those are really important issues that we need to continue to talk about. And the reality is, in our society, we basically have, people want to talk about like it being class warfare, but basically the haves continue to take a bigger piece of the pie, leaving less and less for everyone else. And that's government policy creating that to happen. We're allowing a system in place that ensures that the few have more and the many have less. And that's through our taxing policy, that's through our regulation policy, that's through our oversight policy, and we can change that. It just requires us to do it. So it impacts people, how it plays out with COVID obviously is a lower income people and people of color are disproportionately being impacted by COVID. And we see that play out in a race and class way. And so these conversations have to be connected. It can't be we can't just individualize it, because it's a system that's creating the struggle that people are faced with, and we need to have systemic solutions to systemic problems. And I think it's really important that we all, my father, example, went to Brooklyn College, raised by a single mom with 3 kids. Brooklyn College was free. That's how he was able to advance himself. But he had opportunity because he was white, and he had those chances. Society is creating real barriers that we just need to talk about and we need to work on, and we can do that in New York City. We have the interest and desire to talk about race and class in a powerful way.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we'll move on to the next section now. Zarette?
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now.
Great. Hi, I'm Zarette Cortorreal at Junior at Lima College. Up till recently, a college degree was supposed to help us to get a professional job and begin a meaningful career. However, many of us doubt that we can achieve that now. Given this new economic outlook, as one of my fellow classmates, a graduating senior, recently started asking themselves, what is the expectation of young adults going to the workplace now? In addition, many New York City college students, like myself, work multiple jobs to help pay for college. Unfortunately, some of us lost their job as a result of the pandemic, and it is not clear if we're gonna be able to going back to those jobs in the future. Now I'm gonna hand it to Dwayne. Thank you.
Thank you, Zarette. Hello and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dwayne Wright. I'm a current graduate starting at Brew College in the fall. I, along with my classmates, have been hurt financially by this crisis. I have a small business installing ATMs at local businesses. I had a couple of businesses recently cancel their orders as a result of the pandemic, and it is unlikely that they will follow through even after businesses reopen. Zarette and I provided just a couple of examples of the job outlook for young people. There are countless more for young adults across the state, and now onto our questions. Graduating seniors are really feeling the impact of this economic crisis. Many plan to start their careers in the next few weeks. However, this dream may be delayed as a result of this pandemic. How is New York planning to revitalize the current economy and support the employment of college students, especially recent graduates, given the state budget limitations? What will it take for the state to help students enter into meaningful careers?
Can I say, I have a daughter who's a senior in college right now too. So this story that you're mentioning, and it's a conversation that we have at our dinner table regularly as well. She'll be graduating in 2 weeks or whatever. And so the story about like what her job prospects are the same story that you all have. And I think what we need to be doing, and I think we'll hopefully have that soon, is to start having hearings about what recovery looks like. Those hearings are hopefully going to be comprehensive Senate and Assembly hearings where we're going to be collectively saying, what do we need to do as New York State to get people? Small businesses are suffering and the federal government's bailout has not helped. What do we need to do? What protections, what support, what rent protection for tenants, what rent protections for small businesses, especially commercial businesses, can we do? And I think what we need to know is what you all need. So it is like what we're hearing, like from tenants, they can't afford to pay the rent. Small businesses can't afford to pay the rent. How do we get more unemployment benefits? You know, issue after issue, that when issues come up, then we can concretize it and then have a plan. What's useful for us is to have these in summary forms. Like students could be helped with this, students with, the TAP issue, that mental health support, and then figure out if we can do it. We have a terrible budget, but we can figure out where our priorities are, and maybe we can't do all of it, but maybe we can do some of it. And that's really what will be our task in the next few months to come.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Senator Jackson or Assemblymember Glick or Senator Stavisky, would you like to weigh in?
Thanks. You know, I think this isn't the first time that seniors have graduated into a miserable job market. In the 2008, 2009, it wasn't as devastating as this, but it was a bad time. And I think that there probably will be some areas. Right now, we were on a call with the city earlier, and I'm trying to find out exactly where they will have listings for these contact tracers that they are going to be hiring. In the capital region, while people were being laid off, unemployment, the Department of Labor was hiring people to answer calls. I think there are going to be a lot of disruptions in a lot of industries. You won't be the only ones who will be out there looking for work, but you may have some skills that are better than people who are older and less computer literate. You know, we've worried about all of our small businesses in my neighborhood, and some of my friends, we were talking, and I said, you know, for some people who wanted to open a restaurant, this may wind up being an opportunity, because businesses that have gone out, maybe people who are older and have decided it's too hard to start over and they're going to retire. There may be places where people have always had the dream that they could open, and they may be more capable of envisioning an opportunity, and their rents may be lower in some places where they've been completely unattainable in the past. So that's why I say I'm an optimist, because I think out of every disaster, people can find some way back. And I think that you may have to start with, you know, students who are graduating with an MBA right now. They've got a lot of debt and not a lot to show for it going forward, but there may be some opportunities for people who are in professions like healthcare, that there will continue to be a need, and sort of socially, you know, things in criminal justice. So if you're planning on being an attorney, that's still a viable option. There are going to be opportunities, and people are going to have to be willing to think a little bit outside of what their initial thoughts were. But there will be opportunities, and the immediate ones are probably going to be in healthcare and in areas of the service economy.
Thank you. That's good to hear. Senator Stavisky or Robert Jackson, would you like to chime in? Robert?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
So I remember reflecting back when I graduated from college and I was looking for a job and I couldn't find one. And under the Ceta program that the federal government put forward, the Comprehensive Employment and Training Act, I was hired as an investigator aide for the New York State Department of Labor, dealing with unemployment insurance. And as you know how many people are unemployed now, and obviously hundreds of thousands could not even get on a portal because it was 40 years old and it was just so backed up. And then I took the exam and became an assistant investigator, finally a state investigator of unemployment insurance. I'm investigating fraud. And after that, I went to go work for the labor union. And for over 23 years, I worked for the labor union. And I say this to you is that we have to, someone that is unemployed or coming out of college, have to explore every option, not only looking at federal, state, local jobs, but even with jobs with elected public officials. And you have to look at, well, what benefits do they provide me? Do they provide health insurance? Do they provide sick leave, vacation time? And all of these are factors that must be considered in moving forward. And obviously, it depends on what you're doing and what you're looking for. but that's what I will be doing overall, and networking with everyone that I know. So for me, when I was a member of the city council, I had interns that come to my office, and I wound up hiring several of those interns to be employees of my city council office. And so networking is extremely important in the process, and be prepared on a continuous basis. And sometimes when I see young people and I say to them, well, do you have a business card? And many of them don't. You have to make a business card. You don't want to have to spend 2 minutes writing up the information that you're going to pass off to someone. But obviously, Deborah Glick indicated exactly in the health field and with the State Department of Labor, considering so many people are on unemployment insurance, they're going to be hiring people, and all of these traces that are looking to pay from $20, $20 or $22 an hour to 40-something dollars an hour, depending on your experience. I would automatically apply for those because you never know.
Thank you. Senator Stavisky, would you like to add?
In another lifetime, I was a history teacher, and this occurred, similar situation with the Great Depression. And there were two things that were done, and I don't mean to be political, but we got a new president, FDR, and we had a new philosophy, the New Deal, where the government hired people and built buildings and did creative work and so on. And I think we've got to take the lessons of the past and perhaps apply them to the future. I remember the Ceta workers. John Lindsay was mayor at the time, if my memory is correct. And they provided wonderful opportunities. And they became really the leaders of the future, as Senator Jackson is one of them. And I think government has an obligation here as the employer of last resort to create programs, to build buildings and repair infrastructure. And they had a creative arts programs, and the WPA, all of those agencies provided employment, but they also provided hope, and they produced results. And I think that's one of the things we really, I hope that they take a look at in Washington.
Wonderful, thank you. I think we're gonna move on to take some questions from the audience now. Neha, would you like to ask the first question?
Yeah, so these are from like the people who participated. The first question was, what advice do you have for students like us that want help create policy change during the crisis?
Well, I think you're participating right now in and working in organizations like Young Invincibles or NYPIRG, getting to know who your local representatives are on every level of government, and developing a relationship with them. And, you know, we get a lot of letters or emails, calls, and people have problems. But if something gets solved, you really get noticed if you say thank you. So if there's something that happens, and on the job front, I also want to suggest that people look at developing skills for things that are going to be in the new economy, including green jobs. So that's just another little add-on. So I think developing relationships with your local representatives at every level of government is a good way to get your foot in the door.
And stay in school and graduate, get your degree.
All great advice. Senator Jackson, would you like to weigh in?
Sure. Yeah, without a doubt. Deborah Glick hit it on the head along with everybody else. I mean, if I was unemployed right now, I would be or in school ready to be graduating. I'll be networking with everyone that I know right now for any opportunity that I feel is going to help me to maintain my standard of living, as far as one, having a house, a roof over your head. Number two, having enough food to eat. Number three, healthcare is so important. So And then obviously, if you're with a family, you have to help your family members in every opportunity. So as I said, my experience in dealing with people that have come on just volunteering in my office as an unpaid intern, obviously you want paid, but those jobs have turned into paying jobs that for myself and other elected, always looking for opportunities. And that's what I would be doing right now, even if I would be graduating in a couple months or even next year. Just position yourself to be in a position where you can put forward policies or be the tech person in someone's office is very, very important in the process.
Thank you. Those are all words of good advice. We have time for one more question, Neha.
So the next question is, we understand the undocumented students will not be able to receive emergency grants and will be provided to other students via the CARES Act. What is the state doing to support the undocumented students during the crisis?
Not a great deal. We will continue to provide TAP. The DREAM Act will continue, and we will continue to have TAP support, and other state-based scholarships will continue to be available, and undocumented students are able to access those. I believe that nobody is, for food assistance, nobody is checked for their food assistance, and the state is not doing anything other than sending, an additional $25 million to the food banks for emergency assistance. But there isn't anything that I'm aware of that is specifically for undocumented students beyond general support of education.
Thank you. Oh, let's
position, but as far as I know, that she's not pledging.
I'm sorry, we missed the beginning of that, Senator Stavisky. Can you repeat that?
No, all I said is I know that there are some challenges being made to Betsy DeVos's decision not to include undocumented, and I don't know if they're going to be successful, particularly in court with all of those new judges. I'm not optimistic about that.
Okay, thank you. And then Senator Jackson, would you like to add anything? No? Okay, great. So I think we are nearly at time. I'm gonna hand it over now to Sierra, who will wrap us up.
Hi, my name is Sierra Atkins and I attend the New York City College of Technology. And I wanted to say a big thank you to everyone that joined us today in our town hall. This has been a very difficult time for all of us, so it's encouraging to hear that we have elected officials fighting for college students. As you've heard, having access to basic needs and academic supports are critical to our college success now more than ever. And I hope that this town hall has helped to inform your work to ensure that New York City college students have the resources that they need to graduate from college and begin their careers. On the screen, you'll see a link to our petition to Governor Cuomo demanding no future cuts to higher education. And I hope that all the participants that are on today would sign on it. And please be sure to follow our work through Young Invincibles on Twitter or by reaching out to Marissa and Melanie. And we thank you again. We hope that you stay safe.
Great. Thank you to everyone for joining.
all of
We
you.
appreciate it. Have a great day.